Good morning, everybody. It's Julie Roginski and Olga Latman. Welcome to this week's episode of Pax Americana. It is a little after 11 a.m. Eastern here in New York City. From wherever you are watching us around the world, welcome, and we're so glad to have you here. Olga, we have an incredible special guest coming up here today, Tim Mack, who is just an amazing journalist, reporter, who was I'll let him speak for himself, but a few years ago picked up and moved to Kiev. And he moved to Kiev because he was so appalled about what was happening. And I guess that the Western media was maybe not covering it the way it should be covered, that Tim decided he was going to cover it himself. And he's been in Ukraine, reporting from Ukraine throughout this horrible situation. This winter in Ukraine in Kiev has been the worst winter they've had probably since World War II. The Russians are taking out heat. It is very cold. So I can attest in that part of the world, and they are continuing to bomb and murder civilians in the capital city, not just in the front lines, but in the capital city. And in the midst of this, Olga, NATO's attention has been diverted, as Donald Trump obviously wanted it to be, by Greenland. So if I were Vladimir Putin and I were sitting in the Kremlin right now, I would be thrilled that nobody's talking about Ukraine anymore except us. And everybody now is talking about the collapse of NATO, in that Donald Trump wants Greenland one way or the other, and he has not ruled out militarily taking it by force from the Danes, whose protectorate it is. There have been ships that have been moved to Greenland from NATO countries, EU countries. You have the entire NATO alliance now panicked and focused on the fact that the United States might attack one of its own. The Pax Americana is effectively dead, which is something that Vladimir Putin could only have dreamed of. And most importantly for Putin, nobody's focusing on what's happening in Ukraine anymore. Thoughts, comments, lamentations?
I don't even know where to start. I started actually a few hours ago. A friend in Kharkiv texted me, and same thing. They took out the energy there. No power, no heat, nothing. So this is happening across all of Ukraine. And actually, I was in the midst of writing about it this morning because I cannot for the life. Hello. I can't believe for the life of me how, you have a major European city with millions, a country with, tens of millions of people without heat. And I mean, there's nothing being done. Like, imagine if this was Paris or Berlin or any other European capital. And it's like not even making news, except if you go on social media and poor Ukrainians, are trying to get out their message. So, of course, like you said, Trump, diverted it from Ukraine to Greenland. Frankly, I said it, last week. I'll keep repeating. It is up to all of us to call Congress and do everything to make sure that the United States does not attack Greenland. We need to really make noise about this. And, if we do not make noise about it, we are no better than the Russian people who sit and watch all of, the Kremlin's imperialistic, bloody ambitions as they stay silent. And we really, there is, movement and momentum in Congress. You have Don Beacon, who's always, good on anything Russia related. He basically said that, there will be articles of impeachment if Trump does this. We need to make sure, because there are two things. One, if the U.S. crosses that red line and actually attacks a NATO country and invades it, one, every American, anyone who does not care about geopolitics and, doesn't care about this period, like this is not in their wheelhouse, every American needs to realize that they will no longer be able to travel to Europe. So all those vacations to Italy and Germany and France and whatnot, we're not going to be welcome there because we will look, one, as the aggressor, and two, we're going to, potentially for national security risk, countries aren't going to want us there to potentially spy, collect information and whatnot, which is reasonable. Any country, if it attacked the United States, we would ban their citizens from coming. And two, we're going to have our military, and this is another thing. I don't even know the legality of this and whether the military, will take these illegal orders to fight the French, to fight the German. The Germans already announced that they're moving troops to Greenland. The French and the British are not too far. So we are now being put into a situation, where we potentially, and we talked about this last year, honestly, frankly, shouldn't be a surprise for anyone who's watched this show because we've talked about this. And yes, someone with Scotland, I mean, really, his golf club should be seized. But we talked about this, and frankly, like we just can't allow it to cross that line, and the military cannot take these illegal orders, and I am sure these are illegal orders if they are forced to go and fight, NATO allies and various European military, members. So we need to speak up, we need to make noise about this because this really, we can't allow one sociopathic man to go this far. And it's really infuriating me. And on Europe's side, they need to find their balls and they really need to say, one, if the US steps foot into European territory to try to annex it, they need to shut down every single military base, kick every single American out of European, countries and military bases as far as the military and government officials, and close their airspace because that's going to cost the U.S. a lot more than whatever Trump thinks he's going to get for Greenland if they have to, carry out operations and they can't even fly like the Russians. They can't fly over, European airspace. So, I mean, Europe also needs, they have plenty of cards. They're not a weak continent. They have larger military than the US and more money than the US. So.
But they behave like a weak continent. And I have to say, this is why I think Trump does not respect the Europeans. And you have the prime ministers of every NATO country, plus the chancellor of Germany, not every NATO country, but the major countries, right? The UK and France and the president of France and the chancellor of Germany and the prime minister of Italy and the prime minister of Poland, all coming to the US, kind of hat in hand to try to placate Donald Trump. And they flatter him. And they think the way to his heart is to flatter him. And that's not. I think there is a profound misreading of who Donald Trump is by the Europeans. I think they think that if they cajole him and flatter him, that he's somehow going to stop. And the reality is that only works after you stand up to him. And like my friends in Europe, talk to your leaders because I believe this with every fiber of my being. And I'm an American and I love this country and I'm horrified at what's happening. But I'm telling you right now, you have got to stand up to the United States. And the way to do that is to go and say to him exactly what Olga said. If you are going to invade Greenland, understand that every single base in Germany, in Italy, all over the continent will be shut down. Ramstein, goodbye, gone. We will expel you from our lands. And if you don't want to leave, we're going to have a military confrontation. Now, that's going to make Vladimir Putin very happy, but it's not going to come to that because Trump is not going to want to fight a war with Europe. I mean, that's insane. Right? Seize his golf course. I don't know what Scottish law is, but I'm sure there's some sort of environmental impact statement that he's violated. I mean, there are a million things that the Europeans can do and a million cards that they can play. We're not going to share any intelligence with you anymore. We're not. You're on your own. I mean, hit him where it hurts. Hit him in his pocketbook. He's very proud of that golf course in Scotland. Very proud of it. And, you know, at some point, you have to stop relying on the United States to take care of you. And I think that's the problem with Europe, that Europe has been under the American umbrella for the last 80 years. And I'm glad that Europe has been. I mean, it has helped Europe, but it's also helped the United States. We are the strongest alliance the world has ever seen in the history of the world. And one psychopath has now destroyed it. So if Europe is sitting here thinking that those days are going to come back, they're not. We're not a reliable partner, my European friends. I'm sorry to say that. I am horrified to say that. We're not a reliable partner. And this is all being done in the shadow of him welcoming Vladimir Putin with open arms. So, let's be very clear about what's happening here.
And I'll just add one thing. The Europeans have very good relations with the Republicans in Congress. Use those relationships. Call and say, listen, you don't put an end to this. You want to go fuck around on different continents, that's for you. If you don't put an end to this, then we will make sure everything that we just laid out. And that's it, because Republicans, I'm sorry, you can find a handful who can impeach Trump for this. And this would warrant an impeachment. There is, I know, a bipartisan bill right now that they're putting together to, make sure that the United States is not allowed to attack any NATO ally, not just Greenland. I mean, so Congress, same thing for Europeans. The Republicans do have options. And, they need to be pressured and understand that Trump might be gone in a few years, but they're not going to see U.S. soil ever, or at least for a few generations, because this is unacceptable for the United States to suddenly threaten to annex a country, to threaten to take Europe, Canada, to make all these threats, while siding, of course, with Russia and doing it on behalf of Russia, because right now the only one who is enjoying all of this is Russia, and I would add China, because China's watching this, shit show and like, oh, perfect, they're fighting, the Americans want to take out Europeans, not, us, we're not in their thing. So we, as regular citizens, need to push back against this. Anyone in this community needs to push back, and anyone who does follow foreign policy needs to push back. And there needs to be no wavering on this. Every single think tank center in DC, whether you're on the right, the Rand Center, is it Rand? Or whether you're, on the left, whatever center you are, you need to be putting out a statement and putting, making it very clear that none of this is acceptable. And that's it, because this is not the time to say, well, I want to keep my contacts in DC and, I don't want to piss off the Republican Party, so we're going to stay silent as the center. And I'm not seeing these statements, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think what we're dealing with here is what we're effectively dealing with here is a feckless United States that, if the rest of the world has to understand something. In 2016, you could say it was a mistake, right? You could say it was a mistake. In 2024, after everything that happened from 16 to 20, and after everything that happened on January 6, 2021, this country decided that they wanted more. They wanted more of that. So, if you're the Europeans, you have to understand the American people, for everybody in the chat who's like, well, why don't you stand up to him? Why don't the Americans stand up to him? Believe me, Olga and I are doing this every single day. We're standing up to him. But you have to understand the majority of our country voted, not the majority, the plurality of our country voted for this guy. And I guess this is what the United States wants. I don't think anybody anticipated that they wanted to go to war with NATO. I don't think anybody anticipated that they wanted to take over Venezuela so Donald Trump's rich friends can, you know, basically take over Citgo in the Gulf Coast here. But the reality is that if I'm a European, I look at the United States and I say that this country could not be trusted anymore because it's not just Donald Trump. We saw it and we came back for more. 4 years later, we came back for more. And so I don't know what these people are doing, constantly rushing to the Oval Office, what they're doing. I mean, when J.D. Vance sat down with the foreign minister of Denmark yesterday, that's when the foreign minister should have said, first of all, they should have asked who was going to be in this meeting. And when they found out it was J.D. Vance, they should have said, thank you very much. We're going to get back on the plane and go back to Copenhagen. Because J.D. Vance is not somebody you negotiate with.
No. No.
I mean, you know, it's just, you can't negotiate with him. You cannot negotiate with him.
No. And you see all the distraction. I mean, here at home, Trump wants to, invoke the Insurrection Act, which frankly, like I'm tired of hearing him threatening, if you're going to do it, just do it already. Let us push back against it and that'll wake up more people. Because frankly, again, I don't think the American people, they voted for immigration, policy. This ain't it. I don't think they voted to have, federal agents, mass thugs, that really, they look like FSB in Russia, running around grabbing people, asking them, can I see your papers? I mean, this is not what people voted for. And that's it. So, I mean, you have him distracting on every single end and pulling everyone thin. And we have to stop, strategize and stop being reactive to everything. Like there needs to be an offensive against, what he is doing and what this, regime is doing. And it's the same for Europeans. I mean, they knew this is going to happen. They saw what happened in February, 1 year ago, when Zelensky got thrown out of the Oval Office after being ambushed, for what? For Russia invading, Ukraine? This is his fault. This is the Ukrainian people's fault. Because I can tell you in 2021, Ukrainians were busy with their own things. Absolutely no one wanted an invasion. In 2014, no one wanted an invasion. No one wanted concentration camps in Donbass or Crimea. No one wanted their children kidnapped out of these territories. And no one wanted a full-scale invasion in 22. So, I mean, Europeans knew this, and they, frankly, Trump, one thing you could say about Trump, he tells you everything he's going to do. Like, you don't have to sit and guess and, will he, won't he? The minute he tells you what he's going to do, you need to start preparing. And none of this is new, because I remember with Venezuela, it was like 2017, like the beginning, where the Russians were, jumping around crazy because he was threatening to take out Maduro. And this was the beginning of 2017. Same thing, Greenland. He was threatening Greenland, during his first term. So none of this is new, and everyone should really be prepared. And this is including all of us. We need to unify and we need to push back, whether it's the Insurrection Act, whether it's invading our neighbors, whatever it is. This is not a disagreement about tax policy or health insurance or like normal issues that affect people's lives. This is like, crossing over. And we have crossed over into autocratic, territory. The fact even yesterday with the Wall Street Journal, not Wall Street Journal, Washington Post reporter, her house being raided by the FBI for what? Seriously, for what? When has that happened? I could tell you a million times it's happened in Russia, but here we've never seen it. And the fact is, you have every agency lying and lying. And I mean, we need to really push back against all of this.
Well, I'll tell you this, and Tim can talk more about this, but as this is all going on, of course, the eye's taken off the prize. And could you think of anything more that the Russians would want than the situation happening right now? NATO on the cusp of potential war with each other, Donald Trump saying that he has control over the Western Hemisphere, which means that his sphere of influence is under his control, which implies that the sphere of influence that the Russians think that they have in Europe should be under their control. And of course, Xi Jinping has his sphere of influence. It's very interesting because when they put out that national security memorandum, which they do once every, not they, most presidents do once every administration, they were very specific about what they were focused on. And what they were focused on is the Western Hemisphere. And they said they would protect the Chain Islands, which is basically starting in Taiwan, going all the way down, I guess, to Indonesia. So the Trump administration is saying that they will involve themselves in Asian affairs to stop China. They will involve themselves in the Western Hemisphere to do whatever they're doing in Venezuela now, and potentially Cuba and potentially Panama, and God only knows they're probably going to go all the way down to Chile. But what's missing is that they are saying that Europe should just be left to its own devices. They don't care. Europe sucks. What does that mean? That means that if I'm sitting in the Kremlin, I'm saying, not only do I want my former Soviet republics back, but I want more. I want the Russian Empire back. That includes Finland. It includes Poland. And don't forget, of course, everybody here knows this because most of us are old enough to remember, the Russians crossed the Elbe. They stopped in Berlin. They were not supposed to cross the Elbe in 1945, but they did. So if you're Vladimir Putin, who served in Dresden, you think your sphere of influence is everything east of Berlin. Think about that. East of Berlin, and maybe more. I mean, look, Trump isn't stopping in Venezuela. He's saying the entire Western Hemisphere. Well, then why not all of Poland? Why not all of Europe? I mean, I've said this before, Olga, and people I think just are like, they don't believe it. And Michelle Kinney, who I co-founded the Media Network with, says this all the time, and she's so right. There's a failure of imagination in this country, but what I'm about to say is true. We are in World War III. We're just not firing missiles at each other yet. But we're in World War III. And you see the cadence of how this has all gone. We're going back to spheres of influence. We're going back to, might makes right. We're going back to this realpolitik approach of we're not going to talk about morality. We're not going to talk about what's right. We're not going to talk about democracy. We're not very explicitly, we're not invading Venezuela because we want to bring democracy to Venezuela. We just replaced the bad guy with his deputy bad girl, bad woman. We're doing it for the oil. I mean, he's very explicit about it.
Nonetheless, the money conveniently from the oil proceeds will be stored in Qatar. So not sure what that is doing for Americans. Yeah, like I said, you don't have to, guess much with him, because after Trump plucked, Maduro and his wife out of their bed and brought them to New York, the next day he came out to speak about the operation. And unlike, and I said it before, unlike, Bush or Dick Cheney or any other, Republican who took the U.S. into war, and under false pretenses, WMDs, this, that, whatever it is that they were selling, Trump didn't even bother selling anything. He just really came out and he didn't mention democracy and really just said, I'm there for the oil. That's it. Nah. What about Machado? Oh, no, she's not strong enough to, she has no respect. And that's it. He said what he's doing. It would be refreshing at that time during Iraq, before we wasted 20 plus years, 25 years now. If Cheney and Bush came out and said, well, there's no WMDs. We just want the oil. That's it. We want oil contracts.
Yeah, and Putin, who typically does not say what he means, but lately has been quite clear about what he wants, I guess taking a page out of Trump's book, said that Russian soil, Russian territories, anywhere a Russian soldier sets foot. I mean,
Mhm.
that is a declaration of war. That is a declaration of war. Think about that. Where are Russian soldiers planning on setting foot? Because the one thing Russians have is they have a lot of people they can make soldiers, right? It's a big country. And it's a country with a shitty military and a corrupt, deeply antiquated military, but there are a lot of people there. And it's not just Ukraine. I mean, this is like, if anybody thinks that Ukraine is not important and that they're not fighting our war for us, they are fighting for us. They are dying for us. Because if this isn't stopped, my friends in Germany, prepare yourselves. People in Poland, who I think are very realistic about Russia, prepare yourselves again. You have every, I mean, like you meet any Polish person on earth and they hate the Russian, like they hate the Russians. I don't know if you've ever been to Poland, Olga. I went to Poland once, and I was in Krakow. I was with my friend and we were having dinner. They could not have been more solicitous of us. They were so nice. Oh, you're American. We love America. This is great. This is wonderful. My mother called me at that moment. And I didn't think about it. I just picked up the phone and started speaking Russian to her. And it was like you could hear like a roar. All of a sudden everybody's like, so I was like, I gotta go. So that was the end of me speaking Russian in Poland by mistake. But the reason they hate the Russians, they hate them. And there's a very good reason for why they hate the Russians. Because they've been invaded over and over and over and over again. And they are realistic, unlike this country, in understanding that it's going to happen again. It keeps happening and it's going to happen again. Leopard does not change his spots, whatever that expression is.
No.
So,
And if you actually read Russia's doctrine, and it's been like this forever, it's not about where Russia's military sets foot. It's the Russian people. So I mean, and I've laughed because this is like literally over a decade, a few decades they've been pushing this. And I'm like, first they shove Russians everywhere, whether it's United States, Turkey, Egypt, Kazakhstan, wherever. And then they say, oh, our Russian people are being persecuted. We need to step in that. And they've threatened Kazakhstan with this. They've threatened pretty much every single country, the Baltics, and, every country. They even threatened Turkey a few years ago. If Turkey, continues supplying drones at the time, that we have Russian people in Turkish territory, and we'll use military force to come and protect them. Which, good luck. I want to see them go into Turkey. They'll serve their ass. But they're very clear about it. I mean, and this is what I don't understand, because they're beyond clear of what their intentions are, what they've always been, and that's that.
well,
So
we have Tim Mack here, you guys, who's about to join
yay.
from Kiev. And Tim Mack is just, well, I'll bring Tim in and then I'll rave about him. Hold on a second. Well, what happened to you? Hey, Tim. How are you? I think you're a mute. Still a mute.
Yeah.
Oh,
And frozen.
there you go. Did I mute Tim? Oh, nope. I can't unmute Tim. He muted himself. So Tim, you got to go and unmute yourself, my friend.
Technology.
Hey, Tim.
How's this?
Much better. How are you?
Yeah.
Thank you so
Sorry,
much.
the internet's a little bit shaky out here.
I understand. Are you in Kiev right now?
Yeah, I'm in Kiev right now. Pretty brutal. It's negative 20 degrees Celsius out here, just under 0 Fahrenheit. And we've got very limited heating and power. So I'm working right now, talking to you from a hotel that has a backup generator. But the place I live, is just dark and very, very cold right now. So trying to do the best we can, but Russia's really changed up its strategy in recent days on the kinds of energy infrastructure it's targeting. I'm happy to get into that with you or really any other
Yeah,
issues.
no. We want to tell us. I mean, it's so wonderful to have somebody who's actually in Ukraine right now. Unfortunately, as you know, Americans have diverted their attention from Ukraine because of everything that's happening in Greenland, which is, I guess, by design. I'm sure Vladimir Putin is thrilled about that. But tell us everything you know what's happening in Kyiv right now for regular people who are living their life every single day and going about their business.
Yeah, I mean it's a pretty difficult situation right now. So the mayor of Kyiv, Mayor Klitschko, has requested that people evacuate if they're able to. That's how bad the situation is. The temperatures here are, like I said, just life threatening cold. And it's in this circumstance and in this environment that the Russians have struck key energy infrastructure. Now, Kyiv, like a lot of Eastern European cities, has this kind of post-Soviet legacy of centralized heat distribution. So there are these thermal plants; they create steam, and the steam is then shunted to thousands of apartment buildings throughout the city, and that's how people stay warm. Now, this may have created some efficiencies for heating, but what it's also done is it created a big wartime vulnerability. So the Russians bombed these thermal plants, and these plants then are less able to, less able to keep the city warm. This has been a consideration and a fear since the very early days of the full scale invasion in 2022. It's taken several years to be realized in its fullest extent, but now we have thousands. We have the mayor said that 6,000 apartment buildings are without heat, and of course you can imagine how many people that represents. Um, uh, so it's a pretty brutal situation. I mean, so Counteroffensive, which is the publication that I run on Substack at counteroffensive.news, we try to take this from a human interest perspective. We like I know you mentioned that people are starting to divert or have diverted some of their attention away from Ukraine. Our methodology for trying to tackle that and avoid that is by telling human interest stories rather than telling you, hey, this happened today. We introduce you to a person who's going through that news and then create a sense of empathy and connection between people who are really far away from Ukraine and people going through it here in Ukraine. Our story on cold weather, written by one of our reporters today, is about how she had always dreamed to go to Antarctica, and she found Antarctica coming to her, and her ruminations on how this cold weather has impacted her and her outlook and her dreams. That's one of the ways we tried to bring that news to the public.
Tim, what is the attitude towards the United States right now in Ukraine? I cannot even imagine what regular Ukrainians are thinking about what we're doing. We're not.
Well, I'm appreciative that most Ukrainians can differentiate between Americans themselves. I'm an American, and the American government and what the American government is doing. I think, as we've seen in survey after survey, the vast majority of Americans support additional military aid to Ukraine, support Ukraine in its fight against Russian aggression. And what we're having here is a minority view that's being implemented by the Trump administration and the Trump White House. That really is the source and core of the problem. Um, I would not say that Ukrainians are angry at the United States, but I would think that there's this sort of feeling that it would be funny if it wasn't so horrific. That Ukrainians look at the madness and chaos that we see every day from Washington D.C. out of this White House with a sense of perplexity and a certain sense that there are games being played and a lack of seriousness over the deaths and lives of millions of people who are being treated as chess pieces on a board as opposed to human beings, nations, sovereign countries with all the rights that they ought to be imbued with. And that is the real I think sense of frustration. But in order to be disappointed, you have to have high expectations, right? Like the expectations are the source of all life's disappointments. And I think the Ukrainians have kept their expectations low, that there will be some sort of imminent deal. It is one of the problems with the press, and I count myself among that number. That when there are meetings, we cover them, right? When there's diplomacy, there's meetings, officials are talking, there's ideas, documents. These are good, these are good kind of hooks to talk about the news. But even as we cover it, there's been very little analysis or groundedness in the seriousness of the underlying topics. Right? So Rubio's having a meeting, Witkoff's having a meeting, Zelensky is going to the United States. These are good hooks for video-related journalism. Who they need pictures, they need movement, they need action. But very, very rarely in that coverage do you kind of get a real grounded truth of the probability that these talks will be successful. And the way that we've approached it is that we've considered meetings almost as successes. And what we're really seeing is a bit of theater that's occurring, right? That Zelensky and the Zelensky administration is bending over backwards in order to assert to the United States that it's committed to peace and would be willing to pursue some sort of compromise. The problem with that, of course, is that the Russians have not made any similar declarations, and it takes two sides. It takes two sides to declare an end to military hostilities. You see a lot of compromises being made on the Ukrainian side, but none at all on the Russian side, and that's why that there really doesn't seem to be a near-term peace agreement in sight, despite all the flurries of activity.
And Olga, jump in, but I've got to wonder, because here in the United States, we hear a deal, and ultimately something that succeed, the job, I don't know, Odessa, for all I know. I don't know what the plan was originally, but they're going to just. I mean, constitutionally, of course, without the population do that. They're scared that they want the war to end, so they're willing to make terms saying, no way, no how, we'll suffer through this, but we'll never let the Russians have any part of our land.
I think there's an openness to compromise because there is an acknowledgement that this can't go on forever in the direction it's going. But I think maybe that's not quite the topic on which Ukrainians are primarily focused on. Territory is not the primary thing. It's sovereignty. It's if we give up this territory, a sliver here or a piece or a tract there, are we giving up our ability to be an independent, sovereign country that is able to, as we choose, associate with Europe or the West or the United States? Or are we essentially setting up a situation where we're going to get invaded again in 18 months or 24 months and ultimately lose our ability to exist? So I think people are willing to make compromises on specific tracts of territory, but it's not the deciding factor on compromise. The deciding factor is whether Ukraine will be able to continue to exist as a Western democratic country apart from Russian influence. And that's where sometimes maps can play little tricks on you, right? That you see all the time, these maps that show these what appear to be small areas of land in eastern Ukraine that the Trump administration has suggested Ukraine must give up, and that the Russians have demanded that the Ukrainians must give up. But these are not just empty fields. These are strategically important locations known as Ukraine's fortress belt. These are fortifications that have held out now since 2014, which the Russians have not been able to destroy or penetrate or infiltrate. And for that reason, it's been such a useful and important part of Ukrainian defenses. What the Russians want to do is they want territory up to and beyond this fortress belt, which leaves all of Ukraine beyond it to the west, much more vulnerable to future attack. So it's important to think of this not as territory per se. It's about sovereignty. It's about strategic defense and the ability to defend the country. Um, because the Russians would love to talk about this as, oh, this is just a certain number of square kilometers, or a certain percentage of this district that we already have control over, or whatever. It ultimately is about sovereignty and defensibility and strategy.
I'll just add, I've been, monitoring Russian news, and just over the past week, one, the strikes against energy infrastructure. I mean, they literally are discussing genocide. They're like, yes, we're finally going to wipe out all the Ukrainians. We're going to freeze millions and millions and millions. And I'm not talking about, propagandists. This is Duma, which is Russia's parliament. This is, elected officials, or quote unquote elected, I guess placed officials. Two, the news that Trump said that Zelensky's the one in the way, and doesn't want to hand over territory and whatever, Trump said. I didn't read the interview. Russia's already moving on past that. They are discussing, and this literally is the past 48 hours. They need Odessa, they need Kharkiv, and they need several other territories. So, I mean, Russia is showing themselves, and, like we keep saying, they're not exactly hiding their intentions. I mean, from day one, they've actually since the 1990s, they've discussed about, genociding Ukrainians, and that it's not real people or a real culture. It just comes in waves. And the other thing is, they are very clear as to what they want to take militarily, and that they're not going to stop. And this has not changed for decades. I remember in 2008, Russia's military plans leaked, and it literally was what they attempted to do in 2014, and again with the full-scale invasion in 22. So, that's where it's insane that the U.S. media is not covering this, and why it's so important for all of us. You from Kiev, thank you for being there, for covering, and for all of us to make sure this is extremely clear to people, that Russia has a very different set of intentions, and they are making them clear, just like Trump makes things very clear. The Russians are the same way, and they do it. And no one, not Medvedev, not Narishkin, not anybody from State Duma is going to speak without the Kremlin's approval of the messaging. So it's not that they're randomly just going out and spewing crap.
Yeah, it's well, go ahead. Sorry, I don't know if you have something to add to that.
Very quickly, I want to just hit on this point of vulnerable people, and I want to bring it from the 40,000-foot view, which is these horrific officials making comments about genocide, and I want to bring it down to the ground level, which is where we have a lot of vulnerable populations who are suffering terribly right now. We did a recent story on the counteroffensive about deaf people and how they're dealing with air alarms. They need power, for example, to charge their listening devices and other means of kind of communicating with the world. And they're super vulnerable. The elderly, in particular, here in Ukraine, are most likely to be in apartments that are subsidized and therefore vulnerable to these attacks. And so I'm very concerned about what we're going to find in the next few days as vulnerable populations who have no power to get to their apartments or leave their apartments or heat their apartments. What we're going to find in terms of the fallout. And so whereas Russian legislators are talking about, gleefully talking about the suffering that people are enduring here, they're not soldiers suffering. They're not politicians suffering. They're the most vulnerable in society that are suffering as a result of what I think we can fairly say is terroristic efforts to kill and to harm the young and the old and the disabled and the medically vulnerable, because that's the effect of it.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, I mean, Kiev suffered terribly during World War II with the Nazi invasion, and there are people who suffered through that as children who are now suffering through this as old people who are vulnerable, as you point out, who don't have the means or the money to get out, who may not have family that can take them. We've all seen clips for those of us who choose to find them, and I'm sure, Tim, that you've seen this every day throughout. But we've seen clips of just old women who just can't move. I mean, they're paralyzed; they're not able to move, and it's a sad situation because ultimately that's what the Russians want. I mean, for all that they keep talking about World War II, and Tim, I was born in Russia, so I can speak to this. I mean, World War II is this hagiography in Moscow that everybody constantly talks about. But the reality is, of course, that they're imposing this kind of atrocity, this kind of terrorism, this kind of genocidal behavior that they constantly talked about having been this victim of on the very people who suffered during World War II. I mean, the Germans didn't get to Moscow, but they got to Kiev. And so the Ukrainians suffered tremendously, as they did also under Stalin. I just want to keep that in mind, because you think you go through something like that once in your life. And now, thanks to Vladimir Putin, it's being imposed twice in a lot of cases in somebody's life. And as you point out, not everybody can leave, and not everybody has the ability to evacuate. No matter what Klitschko says, you gotta do it. So I know you've been covering that as well, and thank you for paying attention to those vulnerable populations, because obviously nobody else is in the West. Everybody's attention, we're so diverted by every shiny little object that Trump waves in our faces that nobody's pointing out that we're in the midst, as Olga and I talked about, in World War III, and the Ukrainians are just fighting the first front for us, and they're fighting for us. I just want people to understand that.
Yeah, I appreciate that comment. I think if folks who are watching this are interested in this human level, ground level view of what's happening in Ukraine, please do check us out at the Counteroffensive. You can find it at counteroffensive.news. I'm also seeing some comments asking where am I, because I got a bunch of background, and I apologize for that, a bunch of background noise where I am. I'm in a cafe. Which is basically where everyone is right now, without power, without internet, without heating. We're forced to go where there are backup generators, and so all my all the reporters on the counteroffensive team are working at cafes, coffee shops, things like that. So I apologize for the background noise. It's the best we can do. The only other option to get some silence might be to stand outside, but I'm afraid I can't stand outside at 20-degree weather for too long.
Tim,
No.
Tim, what's next? I mean, what do people in Kiev expect next? Are they just sitting there waiting for the other shoe to drop? Are they thinking it's gonna? What's the attitude right now?
I think contrary to expectations in the West, right? Is I think people in Ukraine are gearing up for a long war that fully extends beyond any short-term political. I mean, you can't make a peace deal with someone who doesn't want peace. And we have no, like I said before, we've had no indications that Vladimir Putin's interested in this war. And until such time, until he's incentivized to end the war, he won't. And so what we're talking about here is that Ukraine is going to be likely in a protracted conflict for a very long time. It's hard to see the light at the end of the tunnel right now. I want to point out actually that in the last week, this so-called special military operation that was supposed to last 3 days has now extended longer than Russia's invasion of Nazi Germany, in which they swept across most of Eastern Europe. That's how long this Russian invasion has come along. And if you look at how little ground the Russians have gotten over this period of time, it's very obvious that their campaign has been a resounding failure. And with that said, the Russian economy is is teetering. Inflation is over 20%. The economic growth is moribund, largely driven by the war machine, which is not a sustainable long-term engine of economic growth. And when I see the vulnerability of the Venezuelan government due to similar factors, I see the protests that are happening in Tehran and major Iranian cities tonight and this past week and the last couple weeks. I can't help but think that authoritarian regimes are very, very brittle structures that when they bend, they snap. Because they don't have the ability to let off pressure through elections, through changes of direction, and things like that. And there is still some hope that what we could ultimately see is additional pressure on authoritarians in the world. Now, the Iranian government, the Russian government, Venezuelan government, they're all very closely linked. They're closely linked in their dependence on oil revenues. Oil revenues are quite low right now, between 50 and 60 US dollars per barrel, at a place where it makes it very difficult for Russia to fund its war machine. It depends heavily on oil revenue in order to fund the war. It's being threatened in Venezuela. The Iranian regime may, knock on wood, may soon fall or at least be deeply, deeply weakened. Russia's losing all of its friends in the world, and it may be next, and we can only hope.
Oh, I wait for that day every day. I have like literally for years. Like I visualized breaking news: Vladimir Putin has been assassinated, and that's it. That's all I wait. But just to add to what Tim is saying, the economy. I deal with people in Ukraine who are factoring this in. The Russian state has literally until the end of 27, maybe the 28, to keep fighting this. That because their economy is imploding. So plus they've been bringing a lot of overseas fighters and mercenaries from Africa, from the Middle East to fight this. They have to pay them. I mean, right now, what is happening inside of Russia is a mess. And hopefully, one thing that's interesting with what Trump is doing is that it has changed the mood amongst Russian military bloggers and just commentators in Russia who have always been very, in line pro-Kremlin, who the past few weeks, have started making very sarcastic comments like, oh, this is what a special operation looks like, not the one that we have. Or when the oil tanker was seized, the Russian one right in front of the Russian submarine and Navy. I mean, the bloggers were furious about this. And they're like, oh, Putin is, past his expiration date and weak. And, they're beginning to turn. And Julie, you and I both know, I mean, with Russia one day standing, I mean, literally in history, it could take 24 hours, disappears. And that's it,
Yeah. I guess we lost Tim, who's in a incredible. I mean, for somebody to just pick up and there you are, you're back.
He's back.
But yeah, we talk about this all the time, Tim. That Putin can't afford to lose this war or to be seen to lose this war, because every time a Russian leader loses a war or is seen to lose a war, they are assassinated or deposed. I mean, going back to the Crimean War with the Tsar, and going back to World War I with the Tsar, and then of course Gorbachev after Afghanistan after a 10-year quagmire there. So I think Putin understands his history well enough to know that he cannot, no matter how slow going it is, he cannot. He's in a trap of his own making, because unless he comes back with something tangible, he won't last long. And for Ukrainians, that to me is just a sign that he can't cut any kind of deal, because he can't cut any kind of deal that leaves the quote unquote Nazi regime in Kiev in place, according to him. So I don't know how this ends, Tim. I don't know, without the United States, which of course will never happen under this president, coming in and basically saying, enough, we are going to arm Ukraine with Tomahawks and long-range missiles that can hit St. Petersburg, that can hit Moscow, and we're going to take the fight directly to the Russians. How do you see this ending, if ever? I think you're frozen. We can't hear you, Tim.
Poor thing.
It's possible that I think just the internet in Kiev is so bad, especially with everybody sitting in the same coffee shop. And
well, I can give a few comments how we'll end until Tim comes and tries to. It's not going to end until the elites around Putin realize, that they're just in a dead wall and decide to take him out. And then when they decide to do that, then Russia will, again, the security services will stick a new face on the Kremlin and come and sell us democracy and put everything on Putin. And again, sell us a reset. And look, we are a democracy now, which has never happened in centuries, but, but it's going to continue. I mean, there's no way Putin just can't, he's not going to stop. I mean, he's not going to stop. The positive, Ukrainians are very innovative in developing, new weapons and new drones. And you see the attacks, the last week. Moscow was swarmed with drones, and I hope to see more of this. Like, this needs to be taken to the streets of Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Tim, can you hear
Tim back?
Tim is sort of back. I think he said he could hear us, but we cannot hear him, unfortunately.
I can hear you.
I hear. Yay! Go ahead.
Your thoughts on all of this, Tim? I don't know what you heard and what you missed.
I heard most of it. Look, at the end of the day, what we're kind of shifting into is a phase in which the Russian economy is the key factor here. Sanctions relief for Russia would be a huge get out of jail free card for the Putin regime. But I want to stress one thing, which is that the Russian, you had mentioned earlier the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan as one of the reasons for the collapse of the Soviet regime itself. I think if we use that as a relative measure, we can conclude, and we can continue to assert constantly to anyone we talk to, the Russians have already lost this war and have very little claim to victory in any case. That the Russians, from a casualty perspective, have lost more in dead and wounded in Ukraine over the last 4 years than they did over a decade of war in Afghanistan. That alone should be, and for very, very, very meandering and low territorial gains. Not to mention, other than the city of Mariupol, no major cities in Ukraine. So it's hard to look at that as anything other than a huge strategic failure. Now what they're trying to do is they're trying to win at the diplomacy table what they couldn't on the battlefield. And that's what we need to very much to guard against, is any sort of deal that the Trump administration might put together in order to give Putin what he couldn't get otherwise. There's some sort of grand bargain in which the world is sliced up into pieces and spheres of influence. That's really a big concern.
Can I ask you whether Ukrainians, whether government officials you've spoken to, or just regular people on the street, believe in any security guarantees that the West will give them? Because the West did give Ukraine security guarantees back in the 90s, right? Bill Clinton and John Major at the time did sign a security guarantee with Ukraine in exchange for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons, that they would protect the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine. And of course, that was not worth the paper it was written on, ultimately. So, I'm curious as to what kind of security guarantees the Ukrainian government is trying to hammer out with the United States, and whether people believe whatever the United States signs that they'll do it.
You're right to point out their skepticism is based on not only skepticism of any particular government, but the fact that they already have supposed security guarantees. Right, the Budapest Memorandum in 1994 guaranteed Ukraine's territorial integrity that was signed by the United States, the United Kingdom, and by Russia, which has since invaded it. And so now it's negotiating with the United States, which is supposed to already have guaranteed security and existence and territorial integrity, to protect them against another signatory of that same guarantee that had invaded it. Right? I mean, it's a pretty ridiculous situation. The only ways in which you can imagine there being very, very strong guarantees is not by taking the word of any particular politician, but by finding some way to pass into binding law, a commitment to support the Ukrainians. A, B, to have peacekeepers on the ground here. I know the United States has said they do not want to be part of that mission, but you can imagine the Brits, you can imagine the French, you can imagine some German presence, maybe some Polish or Finnish presence here in Ukraine to enforce the territorial boundaries that would exist after a peace deal. All of this, like I say, all of this is a conversation you have once you have people at the table, and once you have a willingness to discussion from the Russians as to how to end the war. If you don't have that, you don't have a peace deal.
Well, I can just add that the Russians are very adamant, and this is since Biden, any European troop, which frankly no one gives a shit what the Russians think, but they've said any European troop that steps into Ukraine is considered a war directly on Russia, and that they will target them, which again, Russia barks more than it actually does. But the point is they're never going to agree to any military presence inside of Ukraine. Honestly, to tell you the truth, this whole thing is like theater. It is like the worst, theater, Groundhog Day of theater, because the Russians don't want peace. Trump wants to hand Ukraine to Russia. Zelensky's playing along, but he has no power either. Even if Zelensky wanted to hand in one block of Ukrainian territory, that has to be done through a referendum from the Ukrainian people. And no one, you need a ceasefire for that. So we just keep going in circles and circles and circles. And now a year later, we're back to same thing. And Russia doesn't want. If they wanted peace, they can find the border that they crossed over and go right back and go home.
Can't do it though. If he does it, he'll be dead.
No.
That's the dilemma. I think the Russians find them. Well, not the Russians. That Putin finds himself in, and that's the dilemma that, of course, applies to the Ukrainians who are suffering in Kyiv tonight in minus 20 degrees Celsius cold. And for people in the United States, I don't think, unless you live in Alaska, you've experienced that kind of cold. It's really cold. So, Tim, we promised we'd keep you for half an hour because I know you probably have a lot of stuff to do. Will you please stay safe? And thank you so much for coming.
And come back.
And come back.
Please come back.
And tell us, update us on what's going on. It's important to have you here and to tell people about what's happening, because the eye is off the prize. But guys, we have to focus on what's happening in Ukraine. It's the first and most important front in a war that we're all fighting right now. So, Tim, will you come back?
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm so glad to be on. I can't wait to come back on again. I'm a huge admirer of both of you and what you're putting in. And hopefully next time I'll be in a quieter location with more power, better Wi-Fi, and some heat, so I don't have to have got two coats on right now.
We hope that for you, not because we want you to come back in some heat, but we hope you get some heat back. You and everybody in Kyiv gets heat back, and stay safe. We are so grateful to you for reporting from the front line here, and just so much admiration to you for picking up and going there and telling all of us.
I would add, if anyone wants to follow our human interest reporting, www.counteroffensive.news. Please check it out and see if that is something that might interest you.
We are scrolling that at the bottom of this feed, and you're on Substack also, right, Tim?
That's right. Yes.
Substack at Timac, or is that Counteroffensive?
Substack at www.counteroffensive.news or at Timac, but the URL will bring you there.
Got it. Okay. All right. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Stay safe. Come back.
Stay safe.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Bye.
I will add one little thing that the Ukrainians, again, because they don't rely on anyone and they find ways to get through this. I saw a genius way of someone who decided to stay warm. They took like this thing, put bricks around, lined candles, lit up all the candles, put bricks on top, not to fully block, and created like a portable fireplace. So you have Ukrainians in this horrific situation. Still trying to find ways to get through it and to creative ways to stay warm.
Um,
It's
it is absolutely horrific. And it brings you back to stories that you read about during World War II of just human suffering after a Nazi invasion. And the same thing is happening here. To be clear,
yeah.
there's not much difference between what Putin is doing and what Hitler did. The only difference is Putin is not yet able to do it, but the will to do it is there. He is a genocidal monster. And the fact that he's freezing the population of the capital city of Ukraine to death and starving them of energy. He's not harming Zelensky. He's not harming the government there. He's harming old ladies, as I said, who lived as children through the Nazi invasion. I saw an interview a few months ago of a woman who was just crying, a Ukrainian woman sobbing, crying. I think in I forgot where, but in the eastern part of Ukraine, she was speaking Russian, which they tend to do in the eastern part of Ukraine. So I was listening to her, and she said, "I lived through this 80 years ago." She was in her 90s. I mean, she was bedridden. She couldn't move. I can't evacuate. I lived through this. I've had nightmares about this my whole life, and now it's back. I mean, to end your life like that is just...
It's a nightmare. It's a nightmare. I talk to my family there every, day. I check up on my friends, my family. It's a nightmare what is happening. It is a fucking nightmare. Whether it was Odessa, no power. Today, like I said, my friend in Kharkiv, they hit the energy plant. And same thing, no power. Kiev there strategically. And not only that, I mean, hitting and freezing Ukrainians isn't enough. Then you see Russia intentionally sending drones right into apartment buildings. I've seen 9/11 scenes every few days. I see another 9/11 scene of, drones going straight smack into the building, and you have, several floors on fire, and that, not to mention buildings that are collapsing and people are buried underneath. It's just a nightmare. It's a nightmare. And it's a shame, and I'll keep saying it. It's a shame that you have Europe, U.S., we understand with Trump. Like, I don't expect anything from U.S., although I was aggravated because under Biden, Europe and the U.S., gave Ukraine just enough to push back, but not to win. Like, they did not want Ukrainians to win, and they were very careful with this escalation management bullshit. And here we are. But Europeans, I mean, they should, really, this is a European city that has had no airport. Imagine France for 4 years with no airport. I mean, what the fuck? And
well, if you remember, Biden had to take a train, I believe, from or somewhere in Poland to Kiev. I mean, look, this is all, it should be astonishing, except it's not. And we are living in a incredibly difficult time. And I wanted to say that for all of us who are sitting in our parts of the world, I'm sitting here in New York City with heat. I'm wearing a short sleeve shirt. That's how much heat I have right now. It's not 20 degrees Celsius below right now in New York City. It's not even 0 degrees in New York City Celsius. And we are living with all the comforts of the world, while the people who are fighting a war, as I keep saying, on our behalf, are suffering and dying and starving and freezing to death. Children, old people, the disabled, there but for the grace of God, literally. I'm not a religious person, but I mean, this could be any one of us. Any one of us. Olga, if my parents hadn't gotten me out of there, I'd be living in Moscow right now. If your parents hadn't gotten out of there, you might be living in Kyiv right now. So I just, just spare a thought for what's going on in Ukraine, because nobody in the media is right now. Nobody's focused on it. It's completely off the front page of the New York Times. It's off the front pages of the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post, and I'm sure all the French and British and German papers as well. Can't speak for those. Certainly, I think Australian papers are not covering this day in, day out on the front page. We should be. We should be. So on that note, we are so grateful to Tim for joining us. It just truly puts a face to what's going on. Slava Ukraine. I say that with my Russian accent, so I apologize, but that's the only way I know how to say it. Slava Ukraine. And
call Congress. Call Congress. Tell them we did not vote to invade Greenland. We did not vote to attack Europe. We did not vote to abandon Ukraine. I mean, the support is there. We really, and this is an election year, strategically target swing state members. As swing district members, that's your territory, the politics. Yeah. But there's enough that you can push on who can do the right thing and stop this madness.
And there are enough. And to Lulu Rose from the occupied capital city of St. Paul, Minnesota, we are keeping you in our thoughts as well. I know the show's about foreign policy, but believe me, we are not too far away from what's happening over there right now. So to everybody who's in Minnesota right now and all over the United States who are living in places that ICE is grabbing people in your neighbors and maybe even you off the streets without checking identification because you look a certain way, stay safe. Everybody stay safe. We hope Tim stays safe. We are so deeply grateful to him for coming on. And we will see you all next week for another episode of Pax Americana. In the meantime, I'll say it again, stay safe, everybody. Bye.
Stay safe, and we will be joining everyone for protest, trust me.
Yes,
we are not taking occupation lightly in the United States. Trump can go fuck himself if he thinks he's going to occupy our city. So don't worry. We are with you in spirit, and we'll be with you in the streets.
Yes, absolutely.
We can take that show live from a protest.
Maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll take a show. Maybe Olga and I will meet up at some tri-state protest and we'll take the show live. Bye, everybody. And we'll see you next Thursday, if not from some protest before. Bye.